How to Introduction to Speech and Language Development. This is the SLP 104 class. In this class, we're going to be talking about how children develop from babies all the way into adulthood and how they develop their speaking and language skills. We're going to be doing a lot of talking about thinking. In fact, that is one of the skills we're going to talk about how is developed. It's called metalinguistic ability, the ability to talk about talking, talk about thinking, think about talking. And that's what we're going to spend this semester doing. We have to have some background information before we really dive into the start of when babies learn their first sounds and how they first learn to communicate. We have to have some background information on which to build. So we're going to talk about the biological and environmental impacts on speech and language development. We're going to talk about the basic principles and concepts of speech, language, and communication so that we have a shared vocabulary. So as we're moving forward and I bring up certain words, they start to become familiar to you. And then we're going to talk about some theories about how scientists and others believe speech and language develops. So each week what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a slide that talks about the vocabulary for that week. I want you to become familiar with the vocabulary presented each time, and it gives you sort of a jumping off place of knowing what I want you to highlight in your studies. So let's look at how is language developed. Well, certainly babies arrive here after about a 40-week gestation and they cry to greet the world. That's their first effort at communicating. It's reflexive. They get here, they are sensing new things they've never sensed before, and how we hear them for the first time is through a cry. They don't stop there. Their cry evolves into gurgles and smiles and squeals and cooing sounds. And very shortly, in fact, within 24 months, they are not just cooing and making sounds, they are talking. They are talking with the language into which they were born, and they are moving. They are moving around their environment, learning more and more about their environment, which again allows them to start experiencing and using more and more language. But that's not all there is to it. There's a lot more to it than this just occurring. There's a process by which the babies have to evolve into in a very short period of time so that they become the toddlers with which we are familiar. So let's talk about biology. The things that I want you to know are just cursory in terms of the biological pieces. And you're going to certainly learn more about this as you take your anatomy classes. But the parts of the brain that I want you to think about are the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. Our information that we've got about the brain has evolved also over time. Behavior about language was often just observed. And in the last 100 years, we've become much better at examining who we are as humans from the inside and not just on the behaviors that we can see. And what we've discovered is that there's two important parts of the brain. I'm not saying the other parts aren't all important, but two key places in which the brain is actively involved in language. One is the temporal lobe. So if you think of where your ear is, I want you to go right above your ear, and you will just kind of put your fingers, rest right there on that bone, and that right there is the bone that covers the temporal lobe, and that is the center for sensory, auditory, and language processing and language production. The frontal lobe is in the front of the skull, and it also contains the motor strip. The frontal lobe is a place that involves inhibition and memory. It is a place where we store problem-solving skills and we demonstrate reasoning. It also has, like I said, the motor strip. The motor strip is a part of the frontal lobe that guides our motor movements. Speech is a motor movement. So if you go ba, 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 and your lips are opening and closing, you are being guided by your motor strip as to how to get your lips together, how to turn on your vocal folds, make sound come through those vocal folds, come out your mouth, and make a sound that you recognize as ba, ba, ba. What we also know about the brain is these things called mirror neurons. And there was a study done with monkeys, and they discovered that when monkeys were engaged in activity, peeling a banana, digging a hole, jumping, whatever it may be, parts of their brain were active. They fired, they were active. But those same parts of the brain that fired during the activity also fired when they watched someone else engage in the same activity. So they didn't necessarily have to be participating in it themselves. Their brain acted as if it was participating. Well, we also discovered motor neurons exist in humans too. So let's think about that. Any of you out there enjoy watching those cooking shows, those fixer-upper shows, Dancing with the Stars? Could it be that you are also experiencing that same firing of the motor neurons, in that you are experiencing what it might feel like to participate in that event? So the same parts of your brain are lit up in watching someone do something as if you were actually doing it. I want you to take a look at these two videos at your leisure. When you open up the PowerPoint on your own, go ahead and click on these so you can see how speech and language actions are also observed. There are some theories about how language develops. Now, unlike the research on the brain, where we've been able to take a look at what happens in the brain, much of what we know about speech and language skills comes from observing behaviors. And so through observing behaviors, we have some theories about how language has developed over time. One of them is called the nature or nativist theory. People who support this theory say that children learn language because as humans, we are uniquely designed or pre-wired to learn language. It is a gift or a skill uniquely human. They believe in the language acquisition device, a section of the brain that is specifically designed for language learning. There is genetic evidence of links to language learning. So a toddler's vocabulary growth is influenced by genetics. Parents have a wide vocabulary that they were born with. That toddler also demonstrates that similar pattern. People who have deficits in their family are 28% more likely to have a child with a speech language deficit. And that certain speech language impairments are linked to chromosomal abnormalities or differences. The nurture theory or behaviorist theory says that children learn from their environment, and the environment is the most important, the crucial factor in the child's ability to learn language. So what happens in the environment is the reason why children learn the language that they do, and children learn language through imitation of behaviors they see within that structured environment. So behaviorists look at it and say, well, despite what the biology you bring to the table, it's really the environment that will offset or encourage or enhance whatever you bring to the table. In terms of talking about behaviorists, we talk about operant conditioning. So it's a method of learning and how we change behavior based off of environmental control. So two of the key words I want you to pay attention to in terms of operant conditioning are reinforcement and punishment. A reinforcement is anything that you do after a behavior that increases the likelihood that behavior is going to happen again. So if a child says, please, can I have a cookie? Oh, you're so happy they said please. Oh, I'm so glad you said please. Sure, you can have a cookie. They're more likely to say, please, can I have a cookie again? Our verbal reinforcement of that, oh, good girl, good boy, that's nice, good job, that again increases the likelihood that that behavior will reoccur. Punishment, on the other hand, says that any consequence that happens after a behavior that increases the likelihood the behavior will decrease is called a punishment. So if a child does something that is a non-preferred behavior and there's a punishment that follows after that, the behavior is likely to decrease or not happen again. Certainly, that's what we would hope, right? Is that our actions and words are less reinforcing and more punitive so that the behavior is eliminated. Another couple of terms that I want you to become familiar with as we talk about behaviors is shaping and chaining. Shaping and chaining are terms that we use often in speech pathology because it is some of the ways in which we teach speech and language. So children come to the table and they certainly don't start talking in words and sentences, right? They come here and they're speaking in cries and gurgles and coos. And we take their first few responses and we reinforce them. So we want them to occur again. And we move them closer and closer to the actual target that we want. So if we hear baby accidentally say da, oh, he said da da. Oh, he said da da. Look, do it again, da da. And we do it again and again, and we model it. And eventually, baby, da da da. Oh, look, he said dad. He said daddy. He said da da. Oh, say daddy, daddy. Oh, baby says daddy. So we evolved and we moved them from da to daddy by shaping through reinforcement. To have that behavior occur again until we reach our target. Baby says compur, we say, oh, computer. That's right, that has some claps in it. Let's clap that out. Computer. And baby claps, and we move that kapur closer and closer to the adult-like model. We call this shaping. Much of what we do in speech therapy for correcting speech sound production is shaping. But not all behaviors are a one product end. Many behaviors, particularly social speech behaviors, are actually a sequence of events. And those events chained together are what actually complete the task. For example, a child needs to wash their hands. Well, they have to climb the stool. They have to get soap on their hand. They have to put their hand under the water. They put their two hands together, rub their hands together, rinse off all the soap, turn off the faucet, get a towel, dry their hands, climb down, put the towel in the trash. A young toddler doesn't get all of that in one chunk. They learn each piece through modeling and chaining of the behaviors that eventually they can complete all of the pieces to hand washing. The social interactionist theory is kind of a compromise. It takes the best of both worlds a little bit. It says that there is a biological impact, there is this environmental impact that helps a child develop language. But what their key piece here is, it's actually the child's desire to communicate socially that drives their need or their expression to communicate with spoken word. In fact, they communicate socially long before they ever use words. A baby looks at their caregiver and smiles, or they show reciprocity. In other words, the caregiver smiles and then the baby reciprocates. Baby laughs, mommy laughs, and baby laughs again, mommy laughs again. And there's this going back and forth socially. Baby looks sad, mommy picks baby up and comforts. There's a communication, a social communication happening there. In this theory, we talk about the zone of proximal development. And what this is this place where the caregiver or the skilled partner plays an important role in managing the distance between what is very easy to do and what is more challenging for the child to do. So something that is easy for them to do might be for them to pick up a tissue and put it in a trash can. They're 18 months old, 2 years old. They can pick up a tissue and put it in the trash can, right? What they can't do is go to the store, buy a box of tissues, come home, open them, put them on the counter, and when they have a runny nose, go get a tissue, pull it out of the box, blow their nose on both sides, wipe cleanly, put the tissue in the trash can, wash their hands, and get back to task. That would be not possible. There's a bridge. So it's little steps. It's just that zone of proximal development is just the one step away from what's easy for them to do. that it is close to what the child can do on their own, but challenges their learning, that they need a caregiver or skilled partner to model for them. And then they now master that new skill with that modeling support and guidance. And that we call that the zone of proximal development. Much of our teaching, good teaching, falls in this zone of proximal development. So we take not what's simple for the child to do, but what they could do if we just gave them some support and guidance. And we don't ask them to do things that they cannot do, because that creates frustration. So speech and language, we take the baby who's crying all the way into young adulthood, where they are talking in complete sentences, and thinking hypothetically and challenging our ideas and our thoughts and feelings. It happens over time, and it's done with guidance and support of the caregivers in the environment. It is the caregiver and the environment that reinforce and respond to the challenge of the child's communicative attempts. So what is communication? Well, let's get a definition of that. Communication is the process, excuse me, by which two or more people share information, facts, thoughts, and ideas. I want you to think about that for a second. How do we communicate? Are we just talking about the spoken word? Are there other ways that we communicate thoughts, ideas, and feelings? Well, there are four main processes of communication, and in order to really understand the children that you're going to be working with as SLPAs, it's important to understand that communication happens in a variety of manners. When a child has a deficit or a delay, it doesn't mean that necessarily all of their communication skills are not working, or all of their communication skills are delayed or broken or different. So it's important, it behooves us to look at what process of the communication mechanism is broken or needs guidance or support. And so there are four, and in the text there's a greater explanation of this. I want you to spend some time looking at that. They are formulation, meaning language. Have to be put into words in order to share with another. So there's a way to formulate language. We don't say me can do it. We say I can do it. There's a reason it says I instead of me. We agree that that's a rule of our language. And I've learned the formulation of language such that I know when to use me and when to use I. The transmission of our thoughts and ideas is what we call speech. So we have this idea, I can do it, but my brain has to tell my articulators, my mouth, what to do with the lips, the tongue, and the teeth in order for that message to come out. Once the message is expressed, it requires a listener, a partner, to hear the message. Again, remember, processes of communication aren't all spoken. So realize that there's pieces here. Reception is the receiving of the message, right? Hearing it. And then comprehension is once they've heard it, the brain of that listener has to take it and process it and says, oh, what they heard, I can do it. Oh, that means they don't want my help. They have to interpret the meaning of it. So let's talk again about the vocabulary. We talked about communication. Again, communication is possible without spoken language. It includes gesture, facial expression, written language, sign language. In fact, our children of today are changing how language is expressed through social media, through the rules of social media, through text messages and emails. Speech is the most common of modalities for expressing communication, and speech is the oral expression of language. So let's talk about the speech chain. The speech chain starts with the speaker, and it starts in the speaker's brain, where the speaker has to have and formulate an idea. That idea is put into language form. Once the language is formed and they say, okay, I've decided I'm hungry, I can say, let's go out to dinner. I can say, what's for dinner? I can say, do you have any pizza? I can say I'm hungry, any one of those. Once I've decided what it is I'm going to say, the motor strip plans the movements of the articulators to get that message to my partner. The articulators have to move in a way that that message comes across clearly. The sound wave is formed. I can hear my own message, so I know whether or not I said it correctly. Those sound waves go to the ear. The ear of the listener receives the message. It goes through their external auditory meatus, the ear canal. It gets to their eardrum, goes through the middle ear, then to the inner ear. And from the inner ear, it goes up through a nerve system into the brain, where the brain of the listener interprets the message. Oh, they're inviting me. What they heard is, let's go out to dinner. I interpret it as, oh, they're inviting me to go out. And that's the speech chain. Here's a slide that shows you the steps of the speech chain written out so that you can read through those on your own. That speech chain, there can be a disruption anywhere along that process. So in formulation, if the person has a cognitive deficit, they may not formulate the language that they need in order to get the message across. They may have a language impairment. They may be just very young and immature and not have the words to express what they want. They may have a structural abnormality, such as a cleft lip, cleft palate, that might inhibit how the oral mechanism, how the articulators produce a b or a t or a k sound. The listener might have a hearing deficit or an ear infection, or there might be sound, a loud environment that's interfering with their ability to hear the message. And then the brain of the person who receives the message, their perceptions, their culture, their experiences, the familiarity with the language may impact their ability to comprehend the message itself. So you can see why we started talking at the very beginning of this class, how complex the language process is, and why you needed to have some cursory knowledge of this thing we call communication. Effective communication has 4 basic principles. So while there are 4 processes involved, and we have to decide in young children which one of those processes is or is not working effectively, the way we rate good communication is by these 4 features. We look for quantity. Did the sender give us enough information? We look for quality. Was it accurate? Was it truthful? Is it relevant? We're going to talk about relevance in a little later lecture. The relevance is important because it actually is a turn-taking skill, in that adults, if they don't find the topic relevant or the information relevant to what you are talking about, they will end the conversation or move on, or not continue the conversation. And children learn this feature of relevance very young. The manner. So is the message sent loud enough, at the right pitch, the right loudness? Is the person using it the right eye gaze, body posture, expressions? Anytime a person violates or doesn't use one of these qualities, we recognize a breakdown in communication. Okay. Memes are a great way of people expressing a breakdown in communication, or expressing their feelings of how they react to when one of these features of communication didn't hold up. So, as I said when we started, this process is quite complex. There's a lot of moving parts when we're talking about communication and the communication process. And I look forward to helping you become more familiar with the process over the next few weeks. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and have a great night.